Maybe you like cooking. Maybe you don't. Either way, the new Blue Apron is for you. Because along with our classic meal kits, we're offering new pre-made and one-pan meals to help you get dinner on the table fast. And now there's no subscription needed, so you can just order and enjoy. Do delicious food your way. Shop 100 plus meals at blueapron.com. Get 50% off your first 2 orders with code APRON50. Terms and conditions apply. Visit blueapron.com/terms for more.
Hi, this is Jonathan Fields from the Good Life Project, and today I want to talk to you about Boost Mobile. The holidays can feel like a blur with lists and plans and trying to make everyone happy. Simplicity can be its own kind of gift. Boost Mobile helps you keep things easy with the $25 unlimited plan that gives you unlimited talk, text, and data for just $25 a month. No contracts, no trade-ins, just the freedom to keep the phone you love and focus on what really matters. Because peace of mind is something we could all use a little more of. Visit boostmobile.com to start saving today. After 30 gigabytes, customers may experience slower speeds. Customers will pay $25 per month as long as they remain active on the Boost Unlimited plan.
And welcome again to the Explaining History podcast. Earlier this week I did a reading from Crisis, Revolution and Russian Jews by Jonathan Frankel. It turned out to be the unexpected breakout hit of the year. This is an episode that's received more attention than virtually anything else. And I can see why. There's such a lot that we can learn about the Jewish diaspora and about the politics within the diaspora, and about the kind of the crisis that really gripped the diaspora during the 19th century, particularly in Russia, that of the pogroms and the rising anti-Semitism across Europe, which is kind of goes hand in hand with the various waves of nationalism that transform Europe in the 19th century. I'm not sure it's ever able in these situations to make a link based on direct causality, but there's certainly, if not causation, there's certainly very close correlation between the developing nationalist tensions and rising anti-Semitism. Of course, anti-Semitism in France was, say, different from anti-Semitism in Romania or in the Austro-Hungarian Empire. They all have kind of slightly different flavours, but predictably unpleasant results. So what we're going to talk about today is the response to the Damascus Affair. Now, in 1840, an Italian monk in the kind of Christian quarter of Damascus and his servant went missing, presumed murdered. And it was assumed, or the rumor was spread through Damascus that it was the Jews that had done it. There is a lot of violent persecution. Many Jews were tortured into confessing, and the Jews became targets of violence. And this is one of the kind of key moments of anti-Semitic hatred towards the end of the Ottoman Empire. And I guess what our interest is today is what was known about the Damascus Affair, and what did the diaspora in Russia and Germany and beyond actually make of it. So let's dive in and find out. The Damascus case was surely more a landmark than a crossroads. It cannot compare in importance with the crisis in Russia some 40 years later. I suppose it's fair to say, as the numbers murdered in Russia and the effect of the pogroms in Russia was significantly greater. But, all suffering is relative, isn't it? Yet when all is said and done, the events of 1840 absorbed the attention of world Jewry and riveted non-Jewish interest upon the Jews in ways probably without example between 1815 and the 1870s and 1880s. The space assigned to this by Jewish historians reflected contemporary opinion, and subsequent decline in interest has surely to be explained in part by the fact that modern Jewish history has increasingly been written in the 20th century from a nationalist vantage point. The degree of solidarity displayed by organised Jewish communities in France, England and the United States, and in more passive ways in Germany, and the forces that mobilised on behalf of their brethren in Damascus and Rhodes, where there was a similar persecution, do not easily fit into accounts that place the greatest emphasis on the assimilation and communal decline of Western Jewry. So if you remember, in the previous podcast, we were talking about this schism between assimilationism and Zionism, or other expressions of Jewish nationalism, Jewish national self-determination. And the argument previously was that it looked like assimilationism was kind of the more dominant the more dominant position in the mid 19th century. And here Frankel is saying, well, yeah, but the amount of kind of solidarity, the amount of the number of Jewish communities thinking about an international diaspora of Jews in Damascus being similar to Jews in London or Jews in Berlin, it kind of suggests that this idea of assimilationism, of thinking, well, we are British, we are French, we are Dutch, we are German, is not quite the whole picture. And of course, people in diaspora communities the world over, not just Jewish people from every background imaginable in diaspora communities, even those who are an integral part of the adopted society, still retain aspects of identity, and still retain aspects of kind of communality and solidarity. It's quite a common thing with people beyond the adopted country. So it's not the most controversial point going. There's an untypical statement by Abraham Geiger has received inordinate attention. In a private letter not published until 1896, Geiger declared that, for me, it is more important that Jews be able to work in pressure as pharmacists and lawyers than the entire Jewish population of Asia and Africa be saved, although as a human being I sympathise with them. Jonathan Frankel continues. The Damascus case is precisely of interest as the first full-scale example within the Jewish world of the emancipationist style of politics. In the campaign, which was launched soon after the news of the blood libels, tortures and terror in Damascus and Rhodes reached Europe in April 1840, the arguments and the means employed had very little in common with those traditionally associated with the Jewish diaspora. Adolphe Crémieux, Moses Montefiore, and many other Jewish spokesmen chose to take their stand as members of European civilization. equally entitled with all other citizens, even if not fully emancipated in England, to appeal to the rights of man. They chose their methods accordingly. In large part, they acted out in the open, determined as it was so often put at the time to win their case before the court of public opinion. A flow of letters to the editor was maintained. As documents came in from the Middle East, they were translated, distributed to the press, and published. Politicians and ministers were lobbied officially in London, Paris, Washington, and these efforts too were made public. It was arranged for questions to be asked both in Parliament and the Chamber of Deputies and Peers. The subsequent exchanges too were reported and became cause for comment in the press. On July 3rd, 1840, a protest meeting was held in the Mansion House, and the Lord Mayor followed it up by sending appeals to the various governments of Europe. Again, the correspondence was published. Public subscriptions were launched to help finance the mission of Montefiore and Crémieux to the Middle East. And this undertaking, in turn, was given maximal publicity. Now, the emphasis on publishing letters, on transparency, was, I suspect, a bid to head off anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. Jewish businessmen up to no good, meddling, pulling strings, etc., etc., that sort of thing. And when Frankel talks about appealing to kind of European values, what he means is those kind of Enlightenment values of that we kind of like the product of that produced and were in turn the product of the French Revolution: liberty, equality, fraternity. The idea that under the law, everybody's rights, particularly the right to speak and the right to be heard, were sacrosanct, irrespective of who you are. And in the 19th century, and still, well, I guess today, but particularly in the 19th century, there is a sense of the specialness, the uniqueness of European civilization, and the idea that Europe is a bulwark against barbarism and despotism, and that somehow this can be this can be kind of channeled into public concern for the bloody crimes against the Jews in Damascus. The results of that expedition were also carefully packaged with an eye to effect. In its own terms, it was actually a failure in that it had gone out with the express purpose of arranging a full inquiry and fair trial, which it was unable to do. But Montefiore and Crémieux, making the best use of the firmans issued by Mehmet Ali and the Sultan, did all they could, and quite effectively, to present the expedition as a triumphant success. Of course, it was easier to conduct such a campaign in England, where the government, and especially Lord Palmerston, the Foreign Secretary, supported the Jewish cause, than in France, where the government of Adolphe, hostile and embarrassed by the case, sought to keep it out of the public eye. The British establishment had a kind of a schism that ran through it when it came to the Ottoman Empire. You had the likes of Disraeli and Queen Victoria, who were essentially not pro-Ottoman, but they knew that if the Ottoman Empire ever collapsed, it would give a huge amount of help to Russia and threaten Britain's interests in the East. So propping up the Ottomans was a good thing. Then you have people like Palmerston and later Gladstone, no fans of the Ottoman Empire by any stretch of the imagination. And in fact, they viewed the Ottoman Empire as and Britain's meddling in the Ottoman Empire to prop it up as kind of this kind of classic Eastern despotism. Gladstone was horrified by the Bulgarian atrocities, where the Ottomans' Bashi Bazouk mercenaries were let loose on Bulgaria during its bid for independence, and obviously they were then defeated after 1876 to 78 by the Russians. And Gladstone organises this great moral crusade against the Ottoman Empire in England, in Britain. And Palmerston was very much very much kind of in favour of the Jews in the Ottoman Empire, and was horrified upon hearing the news in the Times about what had happened to them. But Crémieux, with the backing of the Consistoire Central, was ready to persist in this cause, even in defiance of his own government, demonstrates how little there was here of a traditional diaspora, of a traditional kind of assimilationist mentality. Crémieux, a brilliant advocate, vice president of the Consistoire, well known for his persistent opposition to the use of the Jewish oath, and a dedicated liberal who was named Minister of Justice after the February Revolution, was ready to defy Thiers in the name of French values as he understood them. Rather like Gabriel Reiser, who a few years before had brought out his general De Juden as a blow on behalf of liberal Germany, Crémieux saw Jewish solidarity in the right cause as the highest expression of French patriotism. So Crémieux, a influential French Jew, said, well, what are French values? What are French values, and how do we project them abroad? Well, French values are the values of the various revolutions that have happened in France. They are the values of the of liberty, equality, fraternity, of struggle for freedom against oppression. And that's how you be a good Frenchman. It's you project that overseas, and a kind of an early forerunner to liberal internationalism. I mean, the extent to which you could make an argument that those really are France's values in the 1840s is a shaky one, but it was a positive interpretation of Frenchness.
Introducing Fidelity Trader Plus. With customizable tools and charts you can access across all your devices. Try our most powerful trading platform yet at fidelity.com/trader plus. Investing involves risk, including risk of loss. Fidelity Brokerage Services, LLC. Member NYSE, SIPC.
This argument is by no means to imply that Western Jewish leaders were acting solely out of motives of abstract ideology or pure altruism. On the contrary, they themselves were often ready to admit that the accusations levelled against the Jewish communities of Damascus and Rhodes, if only because they were so widely credited in Europe, constituted a direct threat to their own interests and security. As they saw it, the struggle of enlightened reason against medieval reaction and Judeophobia, which they tended over schematically to identify in large measure with the forces of the Roman Catholic Church, was one and indivisible. If Jews are persecuted in Damascus, they will be persecuted in Paris. If we don't step on it there, it will step on us here. And this is sound reasoning in a way. That Jewish communities were wisest and most able to protect themselves when they practiced kind of the principles of solidarity. Still, the story of the Jews in the 1840, like that of 1881 to 1882, the years of the pogrom, incorporated not only a major but also minor themes. The principal actors may not have acted as assimilated Jews, but it is well to remember how close many in that generation of Western Jewry were to a traditional way of life. A decisive role in the Damascus Affair was played by the Rothschild family, whose connections with European governments in London, Paris, Naples, and above all Vienna were invaluable. Without its moral and financial backing, provided largely but not always behind the scenes, the campaign could never have won such broad support or achieved such success. Indeed, the fact that Montefiore was a close relative made it something of a family affair. But at the time, the Rothschilds were still almost literally only one step out of the ghetto. Anselm, of course, was still in the family home in the Jewish quarter of Frankfurt am Main, and strictly observant. Solomon in Vienna, although enjoying the title of Baron, usually lived in a hotel because Jews were denied the right of permanent residence within the city. James in Paris disowned his niece in London when in 1840 she entered into the first mixed marriage in family history. Much of the correspondence, including that of its younger members, was still conducted in Yiddish, replete with Hebraisms. It is thus hardly surprising that the most instinctive reaction to the Damascus Affair was little different from that which would have been expected of such Jews so exalted by wealth throughout the centuries. And indeed, the same can be said of the community leaders in Constantinople and Alexandria, who responded at once to the calls for help and were able to achieve much for the hapless victims in Damascus and Rhodes long before the intervention from Europe could make itself felt. Again, in 1840, as in 1881 to 82, messianic expectations and impulses of the most varied kind came into play. First, there was the fact, pure coincidence it would seem, that 5,600 in the Jewish calendar, corresponding with 1839 to 40, had been awaited for decades by many rabbinic and Kabbalistic authorities as the year of the Messianic coming. Were the tragic events in Damascus and Rhodes then a sign of the times, or birth pangs? What the Jews, especially most orthodox and observant, did and thought was in turn closely followed by the English Christian missionaries, particularly by the London Society for the Promotion of Christianity amongst the Jews, which had dozens of posts scattered across Europe and the Middle East. In these circles, millenarian hopes flourished, and the restoration of the Jews to Palestine was often seen as the necessary prelude to the second advent of Christ. Obviously, there are kind of millenarian Christians now, with all sorts of crazy and slightly barbaric ideas about support for Israel's actions in Gaza, and the kind of the real extremes of this kind of Christian Zionism. There are people who believe that the end times can be triggered in this way. I mean, and so there's quite a history of that sort of thinking in English-speaking Christian Zionism. It was hoped that when the Jewish Messiah failed to come in 1840, conversions to Christianity would greatly increase. So there was that motivation as well. In March of that year, one of the missionaries in Jerusalem, G.W. Pitts, a convert from Judaism, went specially to Damascus to seek ways of aiding the Jews there, and his written reports, published in Europe, exerted a great influence, precisely because he was considered an unbiased source. Intervention by millenarian societies and leaders in London with the British government followed two directions. They called for the defence of the Jews in Damascus and Rhodes, here working along the same lines as the Anglo-Jewish community. But they also took the opportunity provided by the Jewish plight and the impending war against Egypt for the control of Greater Syria, including Palestine, to urge restorationist policies on the British government. As Anthony Ashley Cooper, soon to become the 7th Earl of Shaftesbury, was not only the most prominent evangelical advocate of the Jewish restoration to Palestine, but also Palmerston's stepson-in-law. Such proposals were not dismissed out of hand. On the contrary, in a well-known dispatch of August 1840 to the British ambassador of the Porte, the Ottoman government, Palmerston suggested that the Turkish government should be encouraged to promote large-scale Jewish settlement in Palestine.
If your appliances can't handle the holiday hosting heat, December deal drops at Lowe's makes upgrading easy. Get up to 35% off select major appliances, and rewards members save an additional $40 on the Whirlpool electric range and the over-the-range microwave. Plus, get up to 60% off select ladders so you can deck all the halls. Lowe's, we help, you save. Valid through 12/10. While supplies last, selection varies by location. Loyalty program subject to terms and conditions. See Lowes.com/terms for details.
There exists at present among the Jews dispersed over Europe a strong notion that the time is approaching when their nation is to return to Palestine, and their thoughts have been bent more upon the means of realizing that wish. It would be of manifest importance to the Sultan to encourage the Jews to return to and to settle in Palestine, because the wealth which they would bring with them would increase the resources of the Sultan's dominions. Given the fact that the vast majority of Europe's Jews were either living or closed within the pre-modern world of Eastern Europe, or had set their sights firmly on equal citizenship and integration, they could hardly be expected in the main to welcome the many projects of this nature being mooted and publicized in England. Most Jews simply ignored them. Some rejected them in anger, as did Ludwig Philippson, for example. But there were those who welcomed them with a great excitement. A man like Yehuda al-Khalai, still thinking largely in Kabbalistic terms, saw in them a sign of the oncoming Messianic age. So again, that's interesting. There were non-Jewish Zionists, if you will, or proto-Zionists, people like Palmerston, that were quite used to moving different groups around the globe, dividing ethnicities, redrawing lines on maps. This is the stuff of a great British imperialist. And the idea that, well, perhaps we should move the Jews to Palestine. If we can eat freely, even while we haven't kind of militarily conquered the Ottoman Empire, if we can freely meddle within it and move, and suggest that people move around, and that the Sultan sort of has to listen, then this is great, and it might even be this backwater about which Palmerston probably knew very little, and knew very little about the people who lived there. It could be economically revitalized with, or the and then there's this kind of almost casual anti-Semitism, where there's this assumption that all Jews must be industrious and hard-headed businessmen and that kind of thing. Palmerston probably looked upon the Jews in the way that British imperialists looked upon Hindu and Sikh and Muslim and Indian Muslim, the kind of the middling sort, the middle tier of Indian society, who could be transplanted to places like Kenya and Uganda to act as a kind of like a colonial clerk class, or to be small business people. There's this, it's the sort of thing they're good at, kind of chauvinism. So I'll continue some more thoughts on this, but as you can see, in the midst of this horrendous crisis that befalls the Jews in 1840, there are not only Western Jews, influential Western Jews like Montefiore, who are looking partly altruistically, partly with a degree of self-interest, to help the Jews of the Ottoman Empire. But there are also Western leaders like Thiers and Palmerston, who have their own part to play in all of this, and their own interests as the kind of the representatives of the two predominant imperial powers. Anyway, I'll probably do a bit more on this because I'm quite enjoying talking about it, and I'll catch you on the next Explaining History podcast. All the best. Bye-bye.
From Adams Morgan to Anacostia Park, we all want safer neighborhoods. But what does real safety mean? Real safety means preventing crime before it happens. By having police work with communities to disrupt cycles of violence. By supporting families with stable housing. And providing more mental health and drug treatment. We know that adding more police and locking up more people doesn't make us safer. Real safety means investing in the things that help prevent crime. Learn more at realsafetydc.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Explaining History. This podcast is an independent production, and it's listener support that keeps these conversations going week after week. If you find value in the show and want to help cover the costs of research and production, please consider making a contribution. You can join our community on Patreon or make a one-off donation. Just follow the links in the show notes for this episode. Every bit of support is truly appreciated. Thanks again for listening.